Hi everyone, this is Grandmaster Magesh Panchanathan. Welcome to Prochesstraining Training Games Analyzed. We have a few more games to catch up, just 2 weeks, but after that we'll be all up to date. Today we are going to look at the ones that were played 2 weeks ago. Let's jump right into it. We have an endgame position here. This is actually one of my games. I played against a woman. I believe she was a master or a FIDE master. I don't know exactly remember this. Samadashvili Martha. I think I've seen her play in other tournaments in New York. This actually was a team tournament in US Amateur East, and they had a very strong team. In fact, we lost this team game. I won my game against her, but we still lost this team championship match. So this game, I'm playing white, and I just wanted to give a simple position. This is not a very complicated one. Hopefully, players who played white here were easily able to convert this into a win. And that's one of the goals of this position, because the pawn that you're about to capture on a5, which is hanging, is simply going to seal the deal, right? And that's what you should be focused on in this particular game. So let's see what happened in my game. So I simply took this pawn, and after pawn takes f4, pawn takes f4. By the way, you want to do these things with minimal kind of counterplay. So that is the reason I avoided doing this move. I know if anyone thought of doing this move and maybe creating a pass pawn here, what you're doing is you're giving a pass pawn for your opponent too, and it's not required, right? And you're also giving me a target to attack, which is, again, a simple reason why you should not play f takes g5, yeah? Okay, now let's move on. Rook takes a5, pawn takes, and rook g8. Okay, 7 check. King went to f6 and a5. So this is quite straightforward. I just captured the pawn and I'm starting to push it, right? Now the defending side is going to struggle quite a bit because there are two problems, yeah? If I trade rooks, the resulting bishop and pawn game is lost because it's same color bishops. If I trade bishops, the rook and pawn games are also pretty lost here because white's king is very advanced and the pawns are spread out so much. So usually you have probably a better chance to defend if they're all together, like all 3 versus 3 was on this side. Probably the pawns are spread out so much, white can probably win this one and create a second pass pawn. So the chances are any of these endgames that you go to, you're still lost. And that's the reason this is such a difficult endgame for black. And also that's the reason why sometimes you get one of these pass pawns and it's just game over. You don't have to worry about anything. It's just too strong and you can finish the game off. Essentially, that's what happened in this game. Rook g2 was played. a6. I simply took the pawn and pushed it all the way up. So if rook goes to a2, I believe I can still go rook c7 followed by... So this is my plan. I'm going to go rook c7. I'm going to play this. I'm going to play this. And it's almost impossible to stop it. Unless maybe black somehow figures out a way to move the bishop around to h3 and g2. Maybe that's the only realistic defense. In most cases, this is just simply lost. So bishop c8 was played, I played rook c7, and bishop takes a6 was played to give up that bishop. And I won a piece and I won the game. So I'm going to go back here again. This is such an easy position. So I know this might be like, oh, why are we playing this? But I think converting such positions can also be tricky. In some games, I saw that white allowed black to get some counterplay, which is the reason why I gave this position in the first place. If you're playing white, the idea is to win the a5 pawn. Make sure you push the pawn all the way up. Stop any defensive plans that black has, and you win. That's how strong this pass pawn is, with the bishop on b5 defending it strongly, right? Okay, so going back here, after this, yeah, actually, I don't think we need to see much. Actually, just one more move. Rook takes h2, bishop b7, I think looks like my opponent designed. So we're pretty much done with this game. The strength of pass pawn in the end game is what this lesson was about. Moving on to the next one. Okay, so this is actually a pretty cool game. I think we had a lesson on center control, and I think this is a fantastic game played by Stefanova against Wojtaszek. And this is, again, a great example of how white maintains control. So this was played in Gibraltar in 2013. So a long time ago, almost 7-8 years ago. And you will see what happens in the game with these two pawns in the center, right? So you have very strong control in the center, and black's only goal usually is to try to break through with this or with this, right? And as white, you just have to stop it. One of the mistakes I've noticed students do is that when you have a strong position with an advantage, you don't need to go looking for more advantages. You just need to conserve your advantage or protect your advantage. So in this case, if black cannot easily break the center, I think white will maintain the advantage, right? Let's see what happens in the game. So queen f3 was the first move. And clearly now you cannot play e5 because there is just too much pressure. I cannot play that. And c5, I think simply will run into d5. And the bishop diagonal will open. The pawn will become strong. So both moves are not possible. Bishop to g7. And now what should white play? I would, if you want, you can pause a little bit to see what exactly would be your strategy. Okay, so hopefully you decided, what exactly you should play. The problem, of course, is black is threatening e5. And you can go knight d3, but that's a trade. You have to decide if you want to do a trade. Or you can kind of play e5, but that's going to put this pawn as a weak pawn and give this pawn square to black as an outpost. So the decision is e5. And again, sometimes I'd be worried about this move, but in this position, it's extremely justified, and we're going to talk about it in a second. But before that, I'm going to go back to knight d3. And this is, again, a common mistake that I've seen students make, is that when you are up in space, you have lots of space, you should definitely try to avoid trades, right? The more pieces black has, the more difficult it is to find good squares for these pieces, because I just lack space. If you trade a bunch of pieces, it becomes easier for the defending side. So that's the reason I'm not a big fan of this in e5. So the idea is I'm just completely taking control of the center with more space. I'm only giving you one square, which is actually a big deal if you think about it. It's like a huge outpost blocking the file, but the space is going to compensate for it. Let's see what happens in the game. Rook e d8, now knight d3. So now he's offering this trade only because this knight is in a good spot and ready to go to d5. Otherwise, like I said, I would still not trade. Would I trade this knight or this bishop at this point? Probably not, right? Actually, this bishop may be because I want to get dark square weakness. But in general, any piece you can go to a good square, I might trade. Not going to a good square, I will avoid trading because I have more space. Bishop f8 and knight to c5. So again, a nice idea because it's a tactical point now. Knight takes c5, d takes c5. That pawn does look like it's hanging. But if you try to take it, there are knight d6 kind of ideas, which is quite dangerous, right? And this bishop opening up in this diagonal, if you ever take on bishop takes d6, will be very, very deadly. So very nice idea of knight c5. By the way, if you didn't take this one, the knight was probably going to go to here, could take this pawn too. But if the pawn is defended, I'll go there and try to jump into one of these two squares. So very formidable position, I would say, for white after this trade. Takes, and knight to d5. So, okay, black's only consolation is that knight on d5. Everything else, I think, trouble. This capture, again, like I said, would probably run into knight d6, and I have to probably play bishop takes because I'm threatening to take this pawn, I'm threatening to take this pawn. Bishop takes d6, pawn takes d6. And I simply think this followed with this is just enough compensation already. I mean, white is just way, way better because if I put my bishop on f6 and play d7, it's just over. I win rook. Okay, so knight to d5 was played in the game and bishop to d4. So once the space and the center is consolidated right now, the rest of the game is quite straightforward. The only thing interesting I noticed is that Stefanova never played knight to d6. I think it's a natural move that most players will want to simply put the knight on d6, but she didn't do that. I think for a good reason. So improving the position, everything is continuously getting improved. Rook lift with the rook on f3, okay, knight e7. And finally the problem. The reason why the knight on c4 makes sense is because it was also pressuring this pawn. So either the queen or the rook, something had to keep defending that, right? The rook has moved from a8, that means the queen has to defend it. So now black is just lost because you cannot save that pawn. And once I take the pawn, it's just game over. I mean, you can try to take back on c5, but it's just not possible. So after rook's d3, bishop d2 takes. Okay, white is simply up a pawn for no compensation. So the game went on with like this. Queen g5, the queen is getting in, the rook is getting in, and the knight is getting in. Okay, gets in. Okay, so knight is rerouting to g5. And this is when black just simply knight e4, knight g5, and game over. So I think a very instructive game because just Wojciech does not have any real counterplay as black in this game, and white totally destroyed black in this beautiful game. All right, that's how you play it when you have a strong center. Let's go to the next one. All right, this is one of my favorite games. Magnus Carlsen was this was in 2004, so I don't remember exactly how old he was. I don't remember his date of birth, but pretty young, yeah. And his rating was 2552, up and coming. I would say he was around 13 or 14, somewhere around that mark. And this is very early in the game, as you can see. Like he's literally just played bishop b5, d3, and castle, and it's not like much has happened in this game. And black played a very small move, g6, the last moves. Like, knight f6, knight c6, d6 are all common. Very, very sound, normal opening. But black had just played d6. Sorry, g6 after this. So this turns out to be a big mistake. And Carlsen exploits such a small mistake at a young age. Okay, take it. He's already at 2550 GM at this point. But the subtle problems that this move causes, and Carlsen just pounces on that. So think about what is the best move in this position, let's say for a couple of minutes, and then you can pause and then unpause. All right, hopefully you came up with the move that Magnus played, pawn to d4. Even though Magnus had just played d3 and castled, he's ready to waste a move because principles say that if your opponent's king is in the center, you want to open the center. And your opponent just delayed castling by playing g6. So that's it, he plays d4. And what happens next is a full series of tempos, constantly white attacking black and not giving black any breathing space to do anything. So pawn takes d4 is played. Again, I want you to pause and look for a follow-up. You can try this pretty much most of the moves in this game. All right, it's great if you found e5. You could have taken on d4 too, but e5 looks very, very strong. So pawn takes e5, knight takes e5 almost first, and bishop to d7. I think, again, the next move is very logical. Try to guess it. Okay, so if you guess rook e1, very good. Black king is uncastled. In an open file, the rook should try to go to e1 for sure to work on that. Knight takes, rook takes, and bishop to e7 was played. Again, the next move, very logical move. Bishop to g5 was played. Now, again, I could have taken on d7. Probably knight takes d7 would hit a tempo on the rook, and the next move, black would castle. Every move is a pressure to make sure black doesn't castle, right? Bishop to g5. Very simple. If you try to take on b5 now, I'll take on f6 and it's game over. You end up losing the e7 bishop. And I'm threatening to simply take on f6 anyways, right? Now, the bigger problem is that you don't have time to castle. If you castle, I can simply take this bishop, and it looks like you are... Actually, hold on. Maybe I should take this bishop first. Yep, this looks like a stronger move. Let's do that, because if you take this bishop, I can simply take this one and I'm up a piece. If you take the rook, I take this one, I'm still up a piece, because you cannot take with the queen, f6. You cannot take with the knight because of the pin. So again, bishop g5, strong tempo, knight to g8 was played, and queen takes d4. Again, he's giving a bunch of things, he's leaving a bunch of things hanging, but it's still very powerful position for white. With the king stuck in the center like this, I think it's very, very strong. You probably have to calculate bishop b5 very precisely. There's some rook e7 check to get this rook with check. So that's possible. Or even simple, actually, yeah, I cannot do a simple queen trade and take the back because I'll get checkmate on d1, back rank checkmate, yeah? All right, let's see what happened, queen d4, f6. And now I want you to pause and I want you to think. I would give yourself at least 5 to 10 minutes to see what is it that white should do. Because this is a critical point. You have done very well for the opening, but black might get away with it. In a couple of moves, I'll castle. All right, hopefully you've taken your time and thought about it. Magnus completely ignored these threats and played knight c3. This is the power of development, right? So we talk about attacking the centralized king and the power of development, and this is a fantastic example. Magnus brings his knight to the center and brings the rook on a1 into the game at the cost of a full rook. Well, I shouldn't say full rook because I can win it back. Pawn takes, queen takes. Now I could try to win this one back, right? And I could bring this in. So I think he has some compensation back there, but it's not so obvious exactly how. right? You're getting it back. The rook on h8 is going to be trapped when you take. Once you spot that, it's okay. It's quite easy, but otherwise it's a little tricky. Like even here, right? For example, I can play this move and try to keep my rook on the board, but there is just too much pressure. Let's say rook here, and if you try to do this, I can even do this. It's just all coming down with too much pressure for black. So black actually ended up playing c5. So now I think we have a very forcing sequence to pretty much win the game by force. And again, I'll ask you to pause between 5 to 10 minutes and try to figure out this answer. Okay, let's see. Bishop takes d7. Queen takes d7 is pretty forced. Queen takes d7. King takes d7 is pretty forced. Again, I have a bunch of candidate moves. Rook d1 check looks pretty nice. King to c7. Right? King to d5 probably runs into rook e6 check with a transposition. I can do that next move. Right? King to c7. And again, if you guess knight d5 check, fantastic. Knight b5 was also possible, but d5 makes more sense. And knight takes c7 check. So I think at this point it's easy to calculate that like things are falling apart for black, because at the least I'm going to pick up the pawn on f6. At the least, I'm probably going to win more, but at least I'll be up a pawn. Bishop takes f6, rook h to d8, and the last sequence. Just pause to see if you can find a forced win. I think it's kind of easy. Okay, if you found rook takes d8, and rook d1, I think it's very straightforward. You just stop any problem with checkmate threats. You stopped at check 2. For example, some of you might have thought of this move, or maybe this move. Problem with this is I play check, and now I'm free to move my knight. I'm not in a pin. So you don't want to give me that tempo, so that's why this is the best. And there is no check, and I win the piece. So Magnus did this, and his opponent basically resigned. Right? I think it's a very strong example of initiative. I think black's problems are not that it a bad structure, bad pawns, bad weak squares. No. Black's problem was that white's pieces were really active, and black wasn't castled. All right. From that, we move on to our last analysis game for the day, which would be Happy Birthday Paul Morphy week. So we had we usually have these classes where we select players if it was their birthday in the calendar. So this week we had Paul Morphy's birthday, one of the chess geniuses from America, and mostly some phenomenal games in simul and blindfold displays. And he was this one also happens to be a blindfold game that he played. All right. What is white's advantage? White has amazing pieces again. I have pawn, bishop, knight, like 4 of my minor pieces, fantastic. Queen probably ready to come in one move. Rook probably ready to come in one move. It just looks like white's pieces are super active, whereas black's pieces, not there yet, right? So whatever Morphy is doing, he has to do it forcefully with initiative, right? So let's see. Again, I would like you to guess the moves through the video. Pause, guess, pause. Sometimes if I give you more time, think about it in more depth. So let's guess the first set of moves. What are the candidate moves? What do you think you could play? All right. If you guess rook e1, good job. Morphy loves free tempos. If you're going to make a move that's just a free move because you're attacking a piece and they have to move again, you should use it. It's a tempo, right? Later, the rook can come in handy, so why not? So rook e1, queen to d7 was played, and now you need to really launch your attack with all these pieces sitting here. I think the move is kind of obvious. You can pause again to try to think about it for a minute. Okay, hopefully you figure out knight to f6 check. A beautiful piece sacrifice, but it seems very justified. I have 3 minor pieces opened towards your king, and your king is wide open, right? And if I play queen takes d5, what do you think will happen? Black did not play this. I think the answer should be quite easy. Yep, that's just instantly winning the queen because I'm threatening rook g5 check. So queen to d6. Attacking both the bishops on f6 and d5. And what do you think Morphy played here? I think a bunch of tiny brilliancies happen here. Knight to e6. Again, a beautiful move blocking the queen from the bishop. And the most important piece seems to be the bishop. also blocking the bishop from controlling g4, so allowing me to play queen to g4. So a nice move, knight e6. And after bishop takes e6, he played queen h5. And again, a tempo, right? Watch this. I cannot play queen h5 right now because the bishop was hanging. So I play knight e6. I'm actually giving up a free piece for this tempo. By the way, queen h5 was played in the game, but queen to d2 was more precise, yeah? Queen to d2 with the idea of queen g5 check. And also, after bishop f2 check, you don't have to take anything. You just move in. And after bishop h4, queen h6. So let me just follow through the variation from chess base. Bishop takes, bishop e4, rook d8, bishop h7. Okay, so now we are stuck in some kind of a mating net. Rook takes, pawn takes, check, check, and queen h7. Okay, so basically I think black is just totally stuck in a mating net. I just went through this checkmate quite fast. I don't think we need to spend too much time on this. This is a cool little plan though, right? When bishop f6 happens, you're always thinking to take the bishop back, but in such attacking positions, checkmate threats become a priority, right? All right, so the game, Morphy played queen h5, bishop takes f2 check, and again, it's still played king f1, sorry, king h1. And he's threatening queen g5, queen g7 checkmates, so it was not easy for black to stop other than queen f4, but rook takes e6. If pawn takes, bishop takes, you're getting mated right there on g8. And if knight to d7, which was played in the game, you pull the bishop back to b2. In fact, he went on to win this game in an endgame, which is ironic. Let me just show you what happened. Bishop d4 was played, pawn to g3, knight f6, and pieces are kind of hanging all over the place here, yeah? So after bishop b2, I think at this point, the bishop on d4, okay, not hanging. Queen on f4 is hanging, the pawn on d5 is hanging, the queen on h5 is hanging. So you have a lot of hanging pieces around the board, but white just comes out on top because Morphy plays first. G takes f4, knight takes h5, and bishop takes d4. The good news is you're threatening mate with rook to g1, so black just doesn't have enough time to take your bishop on d5. So he ended up playing knight takes f4, setting up the blockade on g6, rook here, knight g6. And then now, since the two pieces are under attack, I can only save one of them. But white finds this nice idea where I give up my exchange, but I keep the double bishops. So two bishops against a rook is usually a clear and simple win. So, okay, so we can kind of stop here. The theme of this lesson is actually piece activity, and you can clearly see that pawn structure is exactly equal. We have symmetrical pawn structure. The only difference is that white has a lot of active pieces, and he made that, he put that to use, right? Okay, so that's a good place for us to wrap up today. Hopefully, you guys learned from these games. Again, I recommend that you look up these games whenever you get a chance. This one is Morphy against Freeman in a blindfold simul. So Morphy played all these moves in a blindfold simul. So I guess that's a good place to wrap it up, guys. So hopefully I'll see you playing training games a lot more. We need you to play training games. That's one of the main things we have because it helps you focus on specific positions, and those specific positions are what we teach in class. It'll all come and fall together when you do this in a repeated process, okay? All right, thank you, everyone. I'll see you